His heart raced with a mix of excitement and unease. After 6 months in cramped space travel, he was finally here. Navarros, the first human scientist granted extended research access to this newly contacted world. The shuttle door hissed open, releasing a burst of warm, spice-scented air. Taiwan hesitated at the threshold. Everything he had trained for came down to this moment. The gravity felt slightly stronger than Earth's, and he steadied himself before taking his first step onto alien soil. "Welcome to Navarros, Dr. Park," said Station Commander Ellis from behind him. "Remember the protocols. Your actions represent all of humanity now." Taiwan nodded without turning. His eyes were fixed on the landscape before him. The diplomatic outpost sat on the outskirts of what the Navarians called Merutal, their capital city. Unlike the modular metal structures of the human compound, the city itself seemed to grow from the ground. Towers of crystalline material that caught the light of the planet's orange sun and scattered it in dazzling patterns. "It's more beautiful than the briefing videos showed," Ta-One whispered. A small delegation waited at the bottom of the ramp. 3 Navarians stood perfectly straight, their slender bodies nearly 2 meters tall. Their skin had a bluish-purple tone that shimmered slightly when they moved, and their 4-fingered hands were clasped in what the briefing had called the pose of formal greeting. Tae-One mimicked the gesture, crossing his arms at the wrists and bowing his head slightly. The Central Navarian, wearing an elaborate collar that marked him as a government official, stepped forward. "I am Overseer Kido. We welcome Earth's scientific delegation to Navarros." His voice had an odd musical quality, the translation device only partially capturing the harmonic tones. "Thank you for your hospitality," Ta-One replied carefully. "I hope my work here will benefit both our worlds." After the formal welcomes were completed, a younger Navarian approached. "I am Duri, assigned as your cultural guide and assistant. If it pleases you, we can begin with a tour of the Central District." The diplomatic team had stressed the importance of early cultural immersion. "That would be excellent," Ta-One said. They walked from the landing area toward the city proper. Ta-One struggled to take in everything at once. The unusual 6-legged animals pulling transport carts, the oddly musical language of passing Navarians, the buildings that seemed to change color with the angle of sunlight. "Our central market has existed for over 2,000 cycles," Duri explained as they entered a wide plaza. "Many of our traditional crafts are still practiced here alongside modern commerce." Tae-One was only half listening. The market was busy with Navarians going about their daily business. Most moved with a distinctive fluid grace that reminded him of dancers or swimmers. But something caught his attention, a disruption in the flow of movement. Across the square stood a female Navarian. Unlike the others around her, she wasn't moving at all. She stood completely still, as if frozen in time. What struck Ta-One most were her eyes, large, iridescent, and fixed directly on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Her markings were different too, coppery patterns traced across her blue skin in swirls that seemed almost deliberate rather than the natural patterns most Navarians displayed. "Duri," Ta-One said quietly. "Who is that woman?" He took a step in her direction, raising his hand in what he hoped was a friendly gesture. The moment he moved toward her, something remarkable happened. The female Navarian seemed to suddenly unfreeze, her stillness breaking in a flurry of movement. She turned and vanished into the crowd with surprising speed. "Did you see that woman?" Ta-One asked, turning to Duri, the one with the copper markings. "She was staring at me." Duri's inner eyelids fluttered rapidly, a reaction Ta-One hadn't seen before. The guide's skin tone shifted slightly darker, another physiological response that the briefings hadn't prepared him for. "Which woman?" Duri asked, looking around the crowded marketplace. "Many come to see the first human visitor. You are quite unusual to our people." But something in Duri's tone didn't match his casual words. The slight vibration in his voice membrane suggested discomfort or anxiety. "She was right there," Ta-One insisted, pointing to the spot where she had stood. She was completely still, watching me, and then she ran away when I noticed her. The market is very crowded today, Dury said, his skin tone continuing to darken. Perhaps what you saw was a young one curious about aliens. Come, the artisan section is just ahead. Tae-won allowed himself to be guided forward, but he couldn't shake the feeling that studied everything available about Navarian culture and biology. Nowhere in the briefings had there been mention of individuals freezing in place like that. As they continued through the market, Tae-won found his focus divided. Half of his attention was on Dury's explanations of the various stalls and crafts, while the other half scanned the crowds, looking for the copper-marked female. She didn't reappear, but Tae-won couldn't forget those iridescent eyes fixed on him with such intensity. That evening, in his quarters at the diplomatic compound, Tae-won recorded the day's observations as required. When he reached the incident in the market, he hesitated. Something told him this might be important, but he had no context to understand what it meant. "Computer, record additional note," he said finally. "Today I observed a Navarian female with unusual copper markings who displayed behavior not documented in our briefings. When she saw me, she remained completely motionless until I approached, then fled. My guide Dury showed signs of discomfort when questioned about her. This may be culturally significant or merely an individual quirk, but I intend to learn more if possible." As he prepared for sleep in the unfamiliar gravity, Tae-won couldn't shake the memory of those eyes watching him. Something told him this wasn't the last time he would encounter that mysterious woman. The morning sun of Navarros shone through the crystalline walls of Tae-won's quarters, casting rainbow patterns across his workspace. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival, and his desk was already covered with notes, specimen containers, and cultural artifacts given to him by his Navarian hosts. Tae-won adjusted the collar of his formal attire, a modified version of traditional Navarian clothing adapted for human physiology. Today marked the beginning of Luzvaran, a 5-day festival celebrating scientific discovery. As Earth's scientific representative, he would attend the opening ceremony alongside Navarro's most distinguished scholars. "Dr. Park, your transport is ready," came the voice of his assistant through the communication panel. "Thank you. I'll be right there," Tae-won replied, gathering his notes. The central plaza had been transformed overnight. Crystal sculptures twice as tall as a human depicted famous Navarian scientists and their discoveries. Banners of shimmering material caught the breeze, and groups of young Navarians performed synchronized movements that Dury had explained were traditional thought-pattern dances meant to stimulate intellectual creativity. Tae-won followed his guide through the crowds, nodding respectfully to the Navarians who paused to observe him. 3 weeks had somewhat diminished the novelty of his presence, but he still drew curious glances wherever he went. As they approached the main stage, Tae-won's eyes caught a familiar figure standing near a side entrance. The female Navarian with copper markings, the one who had frozen in the marketplace. This time she was partially hidden behind a column, but her distinctive patterns were unmistakable. When their eyes met, she froze just as before, becoming so still that she might have been mistaken for one of the decorative statues. Tae-won excused himself from his guide and moved toward her, but a group of ceremonial dancers crossed his path. By the time they passed, she was gone. "You seem distracted, Dr. Park," said Overseer Kido, approaching from behind. "Is our festival not to your liking?" "On the contrary, it's fascinating," Tae-won assured him. "I was just observing one of your people, a female with unusual copper markings. She seems to appear wherever I go, but vanishes when I try to approach her." Kido's inner eyelids fluttered rapidly. "Many citizens are curious about our first human visitor. Perhaps she is merely shy." The ceremony began before Tae-won could press further. He took his place among the dignitaries, but found himself scanning the crowds throughout the speeches and demonstrations. 2 days later, Tae-won spotted her again, while visiting a research facility on the outskirts of the city. She stood perfectly still in a doorway, watching as he examined Navarian agricultural techniques. This time, when their eyes met, she remained frozen for nearly 5 minutes before suddenly turning and disappearing down a corridor. The pattern continued through the week. At a cultural exchange event, she watched from behind a display of ancient tools. During his tour of the education center, she stood motionless in the garden outside, her copper markings catching the sunlight. Each time, the same behavior, complete stillness followed by a sudden retreat. None of the Navarians would acknowledge her presence when Ta-One asked, each finding some way. By the end of the month, Ta-One had compiled a detailed log of these encounters. 15 separate sightings, each following the same pattern. His scientific curiosity was thoroughly piqued. The grand reception at the administrative complex provided his first real opportunity for answers. The event gathered Navarian officials from all departments to celebrate the first month of formal exchange between their worlds. Administrator Pero, head of cultural relations, was making his rounds among the guests when Ta-One approached him. Pero's elaborate collar and armbands marked him as one of the highest-ranking officials present. "Administrator, I've been meaning to ask you about something," Ta-One said, keeping his voice casual. "The female with copper markings, does she work for the diplomatic corps? She seems to be observing my activities quite regularly." Pero's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. His posture stiffened, the fluid grace that characterized Navarian movement momentarily arrested. "Ah," he said after a pause that lasted slightly too long. "You must mean Gina. She works in our historical archives." His tone became more formal. "I apologize if her behavior has made you uncomfortable. She has a particular interest in other cultures. I'll ensure she doesn't disturb your work further." "No disturbance at all," Ta-One said quickly. "Actually, I'd be interested in speaking with her. Perhaps she could show me your historical archives. My research would benefit from understanding Navarian history." "The archives are not generally open to visitors," Pero said, his skin tone darkening slightly. "But I will consider your request. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must greet the overseer." Ta-One watched Pero hurry away, noting how quickly the administrator had sought to end their conversation. He sipped his drink, a mild Navarian beverage that tasted faintly of cinnamon, and contemplated this new information. Gina. He finally had a name. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, Ta-One received a message on his communication device. "Your requested tour of the Science Division has been confirmed for this evening at 20 o'clock hours. Please report to the archives entrance." Ta-One checked the time, 1945. He had made no such request, but his curiosity overrode his caution. Perhaps this was an opportunity to learn more about the mysterious Gina. The archives building stood apart from the main complex, its structure older than the surrounding buildings. Unlike the colorful crystalline architecture dominant in the city, the archives was built from a dark, stone-like material that absorbed rather than reflected light. A young Navarian attendant waited at the entrance. "Dr. Park, I am to guide you to the Science Division. Please follow me." They passed through dimly lit corridors, lined with what appeared to be storage units. The attendant moved quickly, taking several turns until they reached a secure door. "Your access has been authorized for 1 hour," the attendant said, activating the door mechanism. "Someone will return to escort you out." As the door closed behind him, Ta-One realized he was alone in a section of the archives that seemed older and less frequently visited than the main areas. The lighting was subdued, and the air carried the distinctive scent of preserved materials. A small illuminated sign in Navarian script was fixed to the wall. Ta-One's translator interpreted it as pre-contact historical records, authorized personnel only. He had been granted access to a wing of the archives normally restricted to outsiders, whether by design. Had not voluntarily shared. Moving carefully through the dim light, Ta-One began to explore this unexpected opportunity, wondering if he might find answers about Gina and her strange behavior, or perhaps discover why the mention of her name had made Administrator Pero so uncomfortable. Taiwan's fingers traced the strange symbols carved into the ancient stone tablets. The restricted section of the archives was eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of preservation fields breaking the silence. He moved carefully between the tall shelves, his small handheld light casting long shadows across the floor. His scientific training urged caution. Touch nothing, disturb nothing, but his curiosity pulled him deeper into the collection of artifacts. Most were labeled in an older form of Navarian script that his translator struggled to decode completely. After 20 minutes of careful exploration, he discovered a recessed alcove at the back of the room. Inside stood a large circular display case containing what appeared to be fragments of an ancient mural. Taiwan directed his light toward it and froze in surprise. The mural depicted bipedal figures with no tail ridges or neck crests, distinctly non-Navarian. They stood before a group of ancient Navarians, their hands extended in what looked like greeting. More shocking was what hovered above them, a craft similar in design to early human exploration vessels. "This can't be," Taiwan whispered, adjusting his light to better see the details. The bipedal visitors wore simple garments around their torsos and legs, leaving their arms bare. Their heads were rounded with hair-like structures, their bodies matching human proportions almost exactly. Above the scene, symbols arranged in a circular pattern reminded him of star charts. Taiwan found the information panel beside the display. His translator processed the ancient text slowly. The Great Arrival of the Skywalkers, 7th Era of Enlightenment. The divine beings who came from the world beyond stars brought knowledge and healing during the time of suffering. He checked the conversion chart in his notes. The 7th Era would have been roughly 3,000 Earth years ago, long before official human space exploration began. Taiwan moved to the next display case, finding more fragments. This one showed the same bipedal figures standing before what appeared to be Navarians. The Skywalkers held small devices over the sick, their postures suggesting healing or treatment. "Impossible," he murmured, his scientific mind racing through explanations. Could humans have reached Navarros millennia before official records indicated? Or was this merely a coincidence of artistic representation? A third display contained what appeared to be a journal or logbook with drawings. The figures were unmistakably human in appearance, with detailed sketches of their faces, hands, and bodies. Notes in ancient Navarian script surrounded each drawing, with arrows pointing to various features. So absorbed was he in the discovery that he failed to notice the soft footsteps approaching from behind. "You shouldn't be here." Taiwan spun around, nearly dropping his light. Standing at the entrance to the alcove was the copper-marked female Navarian who had been watching him for weeks. Gina. Unlike every previous encounter, she wasn't frozen in place. She stood with a natural confidence, her iridescent eyes regarding him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Gina," he said, remembering the name Administrator Pero had mentioned. "I've been hoping to meet you properly." "How do you know my name?" she asked, taking a step into the alcove. Her voice had a melodic quality that the standard translation devices didn't fully capture. "Administrator Pero mentioned you work in the archives. I've noticed you watching me since I arrived on Navarros." Gina moved closer, her copper markings catching the light in unusual patterns. Now that she was near, Taiwan could see that the markings weren't random. They formed complex geometric designs unlike the natural patterns of other Navarians. "Why do you freeze when you see me?" he asked directly. "I've counted 17 instances where you became completely motionless upon making eye contact." To his surprise, Gina didn't deny it or seem embarrassed. Instead, she moved to stand beside him, looking at the mural fragments. "It is the old way," she explained, her voice quiet but steady. "The posture of divine recognition. My family has maintained the old traditions when others abandoned them." "Divine recognition," Taiwan repeated, confused. compartment opened, revealing additional artifacts carefully wrapped in protective coverings. The official archives contain only fragments, carefully selected to obscure the truth, she said as she gently removed a scroll-like object. My family has preserved the complete records. She carefully unrolled the material on a nearby table. It was a detailed drawing, far more precise than the mural fragments. It showed human-like beings emerging from a vessel, greeting Nevarians who stood in the exact frozen posture that Gina had displayed. 3,000 years ago, beings like you came to Navarros, Gina explained. They arrived during the Great Plague that was decimating our people. Our ancestors believed they were divine beings from the stars. Tae-Won studied the scroll, noting the remarkably accurate depictions of human anatomy. The five-fingered hands, the facial features, even the proportions of the limbs. This is impossible, he said. Human space exploration began less than 300 years ago. We couldn't have reached Navarros 3,000 years ago. And yet you are here now, exactly as the ancient texts described, Gina replied. The same appearance, the same peaceful approach. Even your name carries power in our old language. My name? Ta-Won asked, surprised. Ta-Won. In ancient Navarian, it sounds like Ta-Won, the one who brings knowledge. Gina moved to another hidden compartment, revealing more preserved documents. The Skywalkers stayed for one cycle of seasons. They healed the sick, taught new farming methods, and shared knowledge of the stars. She unrolled another scroll showing humans working alongside Navarians, constructing buildings and tending to plants. Then they departed, promising to return when the stars aligned again. My family has kept the old ways alive, watching the skies, maintaining the traditions. Gina looked directly at Ta-Won. We've been waiting for your return. Ta-Won's scientific mind struggled with the implications. Could an unknown human expedition have reached Navarros thousands of years ago? Or was there another explanation? Your leaders deny this history, Gina continued. They have removed most records from public access, claiming the Skywalkers were merely a myth. But my family remembers. We are the keepers. She pulled back the sleeve of her garment, revealing more intricate copper markings that spiraled up her arm in patterns that reminded Ta-Won of DNA strands. These markings are not decorative. They are a record, a physical manifestation of our connection to the Skywalkers. Gina's eyes met his without freezing this time. When you arrived, I knew what you were immediately. My body recognized you before my mind could process it. That's why I froze. It's an ancient response, encoded in our family line. Ta-Won tried to process what she was saying. Are you suggesting some sort of genetic memory? That's not scientifically. A distant sound interrupted him, voices approaching from the main corridor. We can't stay here, Gina said urgently, quickly but carefully returning the artifacts to their hidden compartments. Those who protect the official history would not approve of our meeting. They certainly wouldn't want you to see these records. But I have so many questions, Ta-Won protested. Gina pressed a small device into his hand. This contains coordinates and access codes. Come to this location tomorrow after the evening bell. I'll show you more evidence that even my own people have tried to erase. She moved toward a concealed door at the back of the alcove. The truth is more complex than either of our worlds realizes. The connection between humans and Navarians didn't begin with your official arrival. It has merely been rediscovered. Before Ta-Won could respond, Gina slipped through the hidden door, leaving him alone with the ancient murals and a head full of impossible questions. The evening bells of Merutal rang out across the city as Ta-Won made his way through the winding streets of the old district. He kept his head down, wearing a hooded cloak provided by Duri that helped hide his human features. The small device Gina had given him pulsed softly in his hand, guiding him through the maze-like passages. His mind still raced with questions about the discovery in the archives. If humans had truly visited Navarros thousands of years ago, it would rewrite the history of both their species. As a scientist, He needed evidence, not just ancient drawings that could be misinterpreted. At the city's edge. Unlike the crystalline buildings of the main city, this one was constructed of the same dark stone as the archives. The door opened as he approached, and Gina quickly ushered him inside. "Did anyone follow you?" she asked, her eyes darting past him to scan the street. "I don't think so," Ta-One replied. "I took a circuitous route as you suggested." The inside of the building was surprisingly spacious, with rooms extending back into the hillside. The walls were lined with shelves containing artifacts and scrolls similar to those he had seen in the restricted archives. "Welcome to my family's home," Gina said, leading him deeper inside. "We have lived here for 27 generations, since the time of the first arrival." They entered a circular room lit by soft blue lamps. An elderly Navarian female sat in a ornately carved chair near the center. Her skin had faded to a pale lavender with age, but her copper markings remained vibrant, even more complex than Gina's. "Grandmother, this is the human scientist, Dr. Ta-One Park," Gina said respectfully. The elderly Navarian studied him with clear, sharp eyes. "I am Suak, keeper of the first memory. In my lifetime, I never expected to see the return of the Skywalkers." Ta-One bowed slightly, following the Navarian custom. "I'm honored to meet you, but I must clarify. I'm not a returning Skywalker. I'm simply a scientist studying cultural exchange." Shuak made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Intention does not change truth, young human. Please, sit." As Ta-One took a seat on the cushion indicated, Gina retrieved a small box from a hidden compartment in the wall. From it, she withdrew what appeared to be a data crystal of a design Ta-One hadn't seen before. "The Council has suppressed all knowledge of the first arrival," Gina explained as she placed the crystal into a projection device. "What you saw in the archives were merely fragments they couldn't destroy without raising questions." The crystal activated, projecting a three-dimensional image in the center of the room, a detailed recording of what appeared to be an ancient Navarian city being ravaged by disease. The images were remarkably clear for something supposedly thousands of years old. "This is from the time of suffering," Suak said solemnly. "The Great Plague killed 2/3 of our population. Those who survived were weak and dying slowly." The projection shifted to show the arrival of a vessel, unmistakably similar to early human exploration ships, but with technology that seemed both more advanced and somehow familiar. "Your ancestors came during the Great Plague," Gina continued, her voice taking on a reverent quality. "They modified our genetic structure to survive the illness. Their medicine was beyond our understanding at the time, so our ancestors believed it was divine intervention." Ta-One leaned forward, studying the projected images with growing amazement. The humans in the recording wore uniforms with insignia he didn't recognize, not matching any known Earth space program. "This can't be," he whispered. "There's no record of such advanced space travel in our history." "Perhaps your history has been edited as well," Suak suggested. "The Council here certainly made efforts to erase ours." The projection changed again, showing humans working with Navarian scientists, manipulating what appeared to be genetic structures. "The Council fears your return threatens their authority," Gina explained, her copper markings seemed to pulse in the dim light. "Their power is built on the claim that Navarians achieved advancement without outside help, that we evolved our technologies independently. The truth would undermine centuries of propaganda." Ta-One's scientific mind raced through possibilities. But why would early human explorers have such advanced genetic technology? Even today, we're not capable of the kind of modifications you're describing. "Perhaps they were not from your time," Suak said cryptically. Before Ta-One could question this strange statement, Suak shuffled forward from her seat. She held out her arm, pulling back her sleeve to reveal intricate copper markings that seemed to glow faintly from within her skin. "Our family carries more of the modified genes than most," she explained. "We are direct descendants of those who worked most closely with the Skywalkers. That's why Jinna's reaction to you is so strong. Her body recognizes what her mind does not yet fully understand. Taewon leaned closer to examine the markings. They weren't tattoos or paint as he had first assumed, but appeared to be part of their skin itself. Bioluminescent patterns that followed what looked remarkably like DNA sequences. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to scan the markings with his research device. The readings made him catch his breath. "These contain encoded information," he said in astonishment. "Not just random patterns, but actual data sequences. They're similar to how we encode backup genetic information in synthetic organisms, but far more complex." "The Skywalkers left part of themselves with us," Jinna said. "Not just in our history, but in our bodies. We carry their legacy." Taewon's device continued analyzing the patterns. "This is remarkable. Some of these sequences match human genetic markers, but they've been modified in ways I'd never seen before, almost as if—" A loud crash interrupted him as the front door of the dwelling burst open. Heavy footsteps pounded through the outer rooms, approaching rapidly. Suak and Jinna exchanged alarmed looks. "The memory crystal," Suak whispered urgently. Jinna quickly deactivated the projection and moved to hide the crystal, but it was too late. 3 Navarian guards in the black uniforms of the Council Security Force entered the room, weapons drawn. Behind them stood Administrator Pero, his face set in a grim expression. "Citizen Jinna, you are charged with espionage and treason against the Navarian people," the lead guard announced formally. "Unauthorized contact with the off-world visitor and illegal possession of restricted historical artifacts." "This is absurd," Taewon protested, rising to his feet. "I requested this cultural exchange as part of my research. There's no espionage here." Administrator Pero stepped forward, his inner eyelids fluttering rapidly in what Taewon now recognized as agitation. "Dr. Park, I'm afraid you've been manipulated by extremists," Paro said smoothly. "This family belongs to a cult that spreads dangerous misinformation about our history. They've been under investigation for some time." "Then explain the artifacts in your restricted archives," Taewon challenged. "The ones showing human visitors thousands of years ago." A flicker of alarm crossed Pero's face before he controlled it. "I don't know what you believe you saw, but historical artifacts are often subject to misinterpretation, especially by those not familiar with our culture." The guards moved to take Jinna by the arms. Suak stood remarkably steady for her age, her dignity undiminished by the intrusion. "Take the memory crystal and all artifacts," Paro instructed the third guard. "Dr. Park, for your own safety and the continued good relations between our worlds, I must ask you to return to the diplomatic compound immediately. This matter does not concern Earth." As the guards led Jinna toward the door, she managed to catch Taewon's eye one last time. "The truth cannot remain hidden forever," she said clearly. "Not when it lives in our very blood." The morning light streamed through the crystal spires of the Navarian Council chamber as Taewon waited to be admitted. 3 days had passed since Jinna's arrest. 3 days of desperate research, urgent communications with Earth, and sleepless nights. Commander Ellis had been reluctant to support his plan at first. "You're risking our entire diplomatic mission on the word of a local historian and some ancient pictures," she had warned. "With respect, Commander, I believe the truth matters," Taewon had replied. "And I believe Jinna is in danger for sharing it." Now, as the massive doors swung open, Taewon straightened his formal attire and stepped into the chamber. The circular room rose 3 stories high, with the 7 council members seated on an elevated platform. Administrator Pero stood at a lower podium to the right, his expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Taewon Park," announced the central figure, Overseer Kido. "You have requested an emergency audience with the full council. This is highly irregular." Taewon walked to the center of the chamber, where a small platform rose to elevate him slightly. He placed his diplomatic credentials on the display pedestal before him. The arrest of historian Gina violates our treaty, he stated firmly. Article 7 clearly guarantees cultural exchange without restriction or persecution. More importantly, the suppression of your history with humans prevents valuable scientific exchange that could benefit both our worlds. Murmurs spread among the council members. Overseer Quito leaned forward. Forbidden artifacts and spreading false historical narratives. This is an internal Navarian matter. Is it? Ta-1 asked. He pressed a button on his data pad, and a holographic display appeared above the central floor. In the 72 hours since Gina's arrest, I sent an urgent request to Earth's historical archives. They transmitted these records to me this morning. The hologram showed ancient Earth documents, expedition logs, crew manifests, and technical schematics of an early exploration vessel called the Magellan. This ship disappeared from Earth's records 3,200 years ago, Ta-1 explained. It was part of an early exploration program that was largely forgotten after its failure. The mission was considered lost. He cycled to the next image, a star chart that matched exactly the one he had seen in the Navarian archives. But they weren't lost. They found Navarros. Administrator Pero stepped forward. This proves nothing. These could be fabricated. The genetic evidence is more compelling. Ta-1 interrupted, cycling to the next display, a complex genetic sequence. This is data I collected from Gina's grandmother. I compared it to our database of human genetic markers. The display split, showing matching segments highlighted in red. Parts of Navarian DNA, specifically in Gina's family line, contain modified human genetic sequences. This isn't religion or myth. It's biological fact. One of the council members, a female Ta-1 hadn't met before, leaned forward. How do you explain this, Administrator Paro? You assured us the artifacts were merely misinterpreted myths. Paro's skin darkened with emotion. Even if some contact occurred, it doesn't change who we are. Our achievements are still your own, Ta-1 said firmly. The Magellan crew didn't build your civilization. They merely helped you survive a plague. Everything since then has been your accomplishment. He switched to another display. The images from the memory crystal he had secretly copied before the guards took it. The freezing response isn't religious. It's biological, Ta-1 explained, showing footage of Gina's characteristic stillness. It's a genetic marker of the modifications that saved your species. Gina's family retained more of these markers than most, triggering an autonomic preservation response when detecting human pheromones. A murmur swept through the chamber. Overseer Quito raised a hand for silence. A preservation response? He questioned. Yes. When the Magellan crew modified your ancestors' genetics to resist the plague, they included a safety feature, a reaction that would identify humans as non-threatening. The stillness prevented accidental defensive responses during treatment. Ta-1 looked directly at each council member. Gina isn't practicing some cult ritual. Her body is reacting to cellular memory encoded by her ancestors. The council members conferred quietly among themselves for several minutes while Ta-1 waited. Finally, Overseer Quito addressed him again. What do you propose, Dr. Park? Release Gina immediately. Acknowledge the shared history between our worlds. And most importantly, allow a joint research team to study the genetic modifications. They could hold the key to medical advancements that would benefit both species. The chamber fell silent. After what seemed an eternity, Overseer Quito nodded. The council will deliberate. Please wait outside. 6 hours later, Ta-1 sat in the antechamber, exhausted but determined. The doors finally opened, and a council aide beckoned him to return. Inside, the chamber had changed. Gina stood on a platform to his right, her copper markings seeming brighter than before. Suak sat in a chair nearby, watching the proceedings with evident satisfaction. After careful consideration, Overseer Quito announced, the council has determined that historical accuracy serves both our peoples. Citizen Gina is released from all charges. A new division of historical research will be established to investigate the first contact period, with Citizen Gina as its director. Administrator Perro looked distinctly uncomfortable, but nodded in acceptance. Furthermore, Kiddo continued, we propose an expanded cultural and scientific exchange. The genetic modifications from our shared past may hold solutions to current medical challenges. We invite Earth to send specialists to work alongside our scientists. After the formal proceedings concluded, Taiwan found Gina waiting for him in the garden outside the council chamber. Thank you, she said simply. Few would risk so much for historical truth.